Matthew. Appreciate it. And thank you for all for sticking around because I'm running the late shift at this point. What I'm going to do is talk about our project called Blooming Around, and I'll get the presentation started. This started out as coming out of our charrette that started in November 2011. We had 12 of us in the original group, multidisciplines, working together to try and solve the issue of mobility for seniors. And our challenge was, how can we adapt transportation in our suburbs to fit the needs of an aging population? That aging population we call baby boomers. At the time, people that were born in the 40s and now are 65 or in the 60s. And the first one turned 65 in 2011. So very relevant, very large cohort of population. And that's something that we have to address as we go through our project. So looking at our stats that are going to come up on the screen beside me, the main issue here is that we cannot ignore significant growth in our aging population. People are living longer, they're living healthier lives, and our system, our transportation system must support it. As you can see here, we're going to go from the current 12% of the GTA population to 42%. So 3 times as many seniors running around in the GTA. Can you imagine that? It's going to be huge. As I look in front of me, most of us are relatively young, except for one of the panelists, which I hope he doesn't get offended. Now, just think of that, more of you, 3 times as many Paul Bedfords in the audience. It's huge. Now, that's a good thing. Looking at our site, this is the site that we had to look at and try and adapt to meet the needs of seniors. This is the Downsview area of the city of Toronto. Generally, it is the main landmark is the Downsview Air Base, and we tried to look at it and see how we can adapt it. Now, we looked at 3 archetypes of seniors, and we tried to look to see how we can look at them and look at their lives and see how we can meet their needs. So the first one that's just zooming across the screen here is the go-go. Somebody who's very active, chooses not to drive, chooses to use public transportation, and has specific needs. The next one is the slow go. Someone uses a walker, a mobility device, still pretty active, but requires a bit of support in his transportation needs. And the third one is our go-go. Someone who lives in a long-term care facility, has a wheel mobility aid, needs to go to the hospital a lot, requires a lot of care. And those are the 3 types. And generally, we went from the younger senior to the older senior, and that's how we went. So looking at these archetypes, the 3 of them, we wanted to categorize those archetypes. We wanted to look at their scenarios and look at what their needs were and try to plan a transportation system around that. Because if we can plan for these 3 groups, our transportation system can be effective for all age groups. So looking at that, we wanted to see, okay, what is their actual journey throughout the day? What do they actually need to do? And we looked at the complete journey methodology, or the whole idea of starting their trip from their house, making their mode choice on the transportation system, going to their institutional use or their shopping or whatever, going to their recreational use, and then making their way back home. A lot of cases when we plan today, we look at individual locations and individual sites or individual modes, and we try to make them the best we can be, but we don't link them. And what we wanted to do is make sure that these are linked so that from the end-to-end trip is sustainable, is accessible for these 3 groups. And if we can't make it work, we have an issue. So looking at services, we wanted to make sure that we sustain the lives of seniors, make sure that they're healthy as possible, and we want to make sure that these services are there for them. So information, something looking at intelligent transportation systems, schedule information, maybe bookings for the travel, looking at the mobility, specific mobility needs and their mode choices, and looking at their environment that they have to navigate in order to get there. These are things that are important for them. So drilling down into these components made it necessary for us to understand what's needed. So the idea that we want to cover here is that each component of that complete journey needs some infrastructure to support it. And we're not talking about major builds, as we talked about in the last presentation, got a lot of interest from our panel members. But we're looking at certain smaller scale or different scale types of improvements that are needed along the complete journey circle. Now, residential, when we looked at the residential modes, we were looking at the housing types and adapting seniors who may be living in single-family homes and potentially moving to other housing types. For transportation, we were looking at creating accessible transportation modes and adapting it so not only the vehicles were accessible, but the environment to get to the rail station or to the bus was accessible. The institutional and commercial aspects are a little bit more difficult because we might be dealing with different agencies, the private sector, and trying to get them to understand that they might have to build a different environment. And recreational is something, again, which is in the public realm that we need to look at, and hopefully that might be the easiest one to modify to get to that point. Now, the concept of the conversion center as a drill down into the complete journey, we looked at the Humber River Regional Hospital, which is a major node that's going to be part of the Downsview site. This is a hospital that's being built on existing MTO lands, and it's going to be a major regional facility. So what we want to do is not only just focus on carting creating out the sick people that are there or maybe there, we're looking at making it a center for seniors to go to and be useful for them and have necessary services to do more than just be sick and go there, but to do other things. Now, we put this quote out there to try and look at it, and this is, I think Paul Bedford paved the way, I'm picking on him again, but he paved the way for this type of quote where we need to be a little bit more radical and trying to look at making things different and how we get there. And the key thing is, as I mentioned before, we have to look at our municipal, provincial, and institutional sectors to evolve their policies to make this work, and then provincial support to make mobility a priority for seniors, considering 42% of them are going to be in that age group or in that cohort. That's another priority for advocacy. Now, in terms of making equitable communities, we wanted to make sure that as Downsview grows, and I didn't get to talk about it too much, but with the Downsview parklands, there's a huge opportunity to develop that community to incorporate these aspects from the start. Looking at the ITS aspects, talking about complete streets and other aspects to kind of get that going. Now, in terms of the ITS, we're looking at taking current information systems and providing them in digital applications that are easy to understand, and not only in a kiosk format as we see here, but on the computer, on personal devices to make it work for them. The other one that we looked at is the complete streets idea, or the equitable streets, looking at modifying the environment to make it easier for seniors to walk, and looking at not only the pathway, but the look and feel and texture of that. Another one is looking at the environment that the seniors, if you want to encourage them to take transit, we have to make the environment comfortable for them. And one was looking at different types of shelters, whether it uses radiant heat, or looking at air conditioning, something that's very expensive per shelter, but it's something that we have to look at and make sure that we can do it where possible. Talks briefly about accessible transportation, accessible parks. This is another thing that we want to make sure. Recreation is going to be a huge part of the lives of seniors. They will have some time on their hands in some cases, and making that environment good for them would work. Another one, of course, is looking at rest spaces and making sure that for some seniors it may take a longer time to get to where they need to go, and they may need to take rests along the way. And providing that for them is important. So as we age, our world narrows us to our abilities. We look for amenities that are closer to home. As our aging population develops, we want to look at something different, providing more higher density environments for them. This site here is the Yorkdale Shopping Center, and what we wanted to propose is, Yorkdale Shopping Center has great services, it has good transit infrastructure, but it doesn't have people living close to it. This is something that we wanted to bring to this environment to make it a little bit better, make it a little bit more useful and more complete. And just for a little bit of context, the pinkish salmonish building on the right is actually on top of the existing GO bus and interregional terminal, and the subway station is just out of sight on the picture. So the idea of clustering the retail, the homes, and the transit is something that we wanted to focus on as well. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and as Matthew leads us through the questions, I'd be more than willing to answer them from you and from the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trevor. And, it's the topic you have is a very pressing one. You showed it right there with 12% of the population right now being seniors, and was it 42 by when? 2031? Geez, so we're talking 20 years from now. That's an amazing strain on our healthcare system and as taxpayers as well. So it's going to be really interesting to be able to see the outcome of that. So we're going to start it off with the responses. Jennifer, do you want to start it off?
Sure, because I'll be very brief because I'm hoping to hear some of the comments and questions from the floor. The only comment I have, I think you've done a great job at demonstrating that great urbanism is great urbanism, whether it's for seniors or it's for children. And in your presentation, every moment where you said them, we need to think of rest spaces for them. We need to think of all-weather shelters for them. If you took the word them throughout the entire presentation and changed it with for us, it's entirely applicable. Planning great cities for seniors, great mobility for seniors is great for everyone. It's great for children, it's great for adults, it's great for community building. So I think the transferability of those ideas are fundamental to great urbanism and timeless principles of urbanism.
That's a good point. Thanks for really noticing that. But certainly the intent, yes, is to ensure that it's building this environment will be applicable to all of us and will be useful to all of us. And so that is a good point.
So maybe just picking up, I actually sat in on one of the sessions of this particular group, and for me what's interesting is, I pick up the comments around the us part about, it's not just about the senior citizens, it's about people with strollers, people carrying a whole, I don't have a car, so I've got to cart stuff around sometimes if I'm coming back to do shopping and trying to bring a whole bunch. So it really is about this complete mobility, about different ways of getting around and at different points in your day, if you have to plan your day. But for me, what's interesting about this is the long-term cost factors. You think about the cost of doing things, and there is going to be a cost. Installing elevators on the remaining TTC stations is about $350–400 million project. But then there's the cost of not doing things. There's the social cost, there's the health cost of having people shut in and not getting out, and then having to figure out how you're going to provide do service provision, because you're not going to let them just, well, hopefully you won't let them just stay in their apartment and no contact. So there's other departments that are involved, not just in mobility, that, you know, public health might want to be figuring out how to access our health system. But then there's also the things if you don't do this. So like Wheel-Trans is a good example. You know, if the average TTC rider receives a $1 subsidy. Now it depends on how far you're going, but that's the average. The average Wheel-Trans trip is $28, which means that they get about, because they pay the fare just like everyone else, they receive about a $26 subsidy. The Wheel-Trans, this is only one example, we could think about this in a whole different one, but it is symptomatic. The Wheel-Trans ridership base is growing in the last 2 years at 10% a year, and that's after they're making it more restrictive to try to cut people off, frankly. And when you think about the costs there, you know, this is multi-millions of dollars, and it's just, and this is, we're just hearing that it's just last year, the first group of 65, hopefully those people are going to be mobile or fairly mobile for another decade, let's knock on wood. But these things are coming, and if it's growing 10%, what are we going to do? So you just, I mean, I don't mean to only highlight Wheel-Trans, but it's one example where, you know, you might be spending X millions today to convert something, but the costs of not doing it in the long run are going to actually be operating costs of thinking municipally. Your capital costs and then your operating costs are in the end going to be a lot higher. So you know, Paul mentioned one thing, the last point I'll make about needing to start these conversations. And yeah, we do need to start these conversations, but we have to get past the conversations as well, and we have to start doing this. This stuff is coming really quickly, whether it's transit or whether it's adjusting for an aging population. And if we start a 5-10 year conversation on this, we're going to miss the boat. So we do have to start and talk about it, but we also have to start doing some of it.
Yeah, excellent points, Adam. I do appreciate that. I mean, and it certainly is a shift that we have to consider. If we go back to, and you're transit guys as much as I am, so you can get this. If we go back to the late 80s, every bus that was out there had stairs. You had to go up at least 3 sets of stairs to get on the bus. If you had a stroller, forget it. If you had a wheelchair, you're on Wheel-Trans. Forget you, right? The shift in the 90s to creating more accessible buses is something that was a mind shift that we look at it now and say, let's, you know, why the hell not is it you don't have accessible buses? That doesn't make any sense. But in the 80s and early 90s, I'm not going to pay an extra $100,000 a bus to make it accessible. Why the hell would I do that, right? So, it's something that at first it's a shock, it's a cost, we look at it as a cost, but then it's an investment. Each person we get on an accessible bus, we don't have to pay the $28 to get them on Wheel-Trans. So it's those types of thinking, just from the transit perspective, and let alone the other aspects that I did touch upon. It's something that's an investment that we have to make the system better.
Okay, some brief comments. I enjoyed your presentation, and I guess when you were looking at me, I can confess I turned 65 last year, so I'm the only official senior up here, I guess. And you know, I honestly think this 12 to 42% thing, which is real, we're like sleepwalking here. We're not acting like we're really going to prepare for this, and I think, you know, we need to be much more aggressive in a whole bunch of fronts. I had 2 thoughts, which is, you know, I think the kind of city, back to Jennifer's point, that we want to build is a city where you don't need to own a car throughout your entire life cycle, and you won't feel deprived as a result of it because of all the transportation choices that you were talking about. And also the housing choices in your own community, from the first rental apartment to the nursing home in your own community. So, you know, it's this mindset shift that we need to accomplish from a policy and a political and leadership perspective. The last quick comment I'll make, you touched on Yorkville, mixed use, which I totally agree. But I would go much further than that. Anybody here from Vancouver originally? Wonderful. You must know on Cambie Street, the Home Depot, just to the south of City Hall. What's it got on the roof of the Home Depot? Housing. Mixed use, right at the top of the Home Depot, right? And retail at grade, and then the big store, and then housing on top. We got a push the envelope much, much further in terms of the mix. I'll give you my last example, which was, drives me crazy. In terms of the Ontario government, talks about, places to grow, mixed use, intensification, everything else. Okay, so what's the store that most of us probably use every week?
Grocery store.
I was going to say the LCBO. Now, why in God's name wouldn't you build condos on top of the liquor store? I can give you all kinds of examples in Toronto where they build one-story liquor stores on Yonge Street.
I think there'd be some frat houses that would actually volunteer.
There you go. So I put it to you, who wouldn't want to live above a liquor store, right? What about Shoppers Drug Mart? Wouldn't that be a fabulous place for seniors housing on top of a Shoppers Drug Mart? We've got to change our thinking, totally. So I'll shut up and pass it on.
No rebuttal for that, that's great.
Well, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this. I'm not part of the weird and wonderful world of city building. I'm a professor of forestry. And I spent most of my experience living in rural and northern Canada. But I have some observations from living way up there in terms of how we need to create a more sustainable society here from the world of forestry. There was a statistic in Jennifer's excellent op-ed this week about how more than 80% of us now live in cities. I think one of the greatest consequences of this fact is that we're increasingly becoming disconnected from the natural world. We tend to focus a lot on children, and perhaps you've heard the term nature deficit disorder, the idea that as our kids become increasingly disconnected from the natural world, their own physical and mental well-being is suffering. But I really think we need to think about elders, especially because access to nature is so much dependent on mobility. When I moved to Toronto from British Columbia, I wanted to visit your amazing Greenbelt. It took me an hour and a half to get to it, through the worst urban sprawl I had ever experienced. And my sense of it is that in order to make this future that you're designing really sustainable, you need to bring nature literally into the hearts of those communities. And you can see it here at Evergreen Brickworks, the idea of integrating as much green living infrastructure into the design of these communities. And I would do it primarily because of the fact that the people living in these communities will be healthier, both in terms of their physical and mental well-being, in terms of having access to that nature. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think on top of that too, is you look at nature as infrastructure in some kind of ways for the city. So whether it's stormwater retention, it's providing shade, so that means electricity bills are smaller, those types of things. It's looking at it in that way, so we can still be kind of really urban and urbane by looking at our nature as infrastructure.
Yeah, looking at our site in particular, our site was Downsview. Now, the biggest feature within that park, within the neighborhood is Park Downsview Park. There's a huge opportunity to create a large urban park there and have a huge connection to nature as a result. Now, there is some debate about that. Even in the paper last week, there was an article about it in the Star about how some of that is being taken away, or that park, or the land that was designated as parkland is being taken away to fund some development. Because that's how the park is going to thrive and be able to naturalize the area. But if we focus on really integrating that density of development with the nature and bring that into the natural area, I think that's a huge focus, and that would be a huge benefit to the city.
Nancy?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I enjoyed it. The thing I was most intrigued by, I think, was that the categorization that you gave as far as go, so-go, and no-go. And I think that it is like, what I find kind of interesting about it is that in a way that what's happening when you're a senior, there is an opportunity because you're not in a static state. So I think a lot of what happens with our transportation decisions we act out of habit. And so, when your physical capabilities are changing, you need to change the way that you move around as well. And And, I have a kind of personal example of that with my aunt who lived in a suburb very much like this one. She went from a go-go to a slow-go after she had a stroke, and was used to getting around the city, even in the suburbs, by transit. That was how she got around. And it just was like painful to watch, like that process. And it's almost like I think that kind of in that seamless idea that you're thinking of, I think there needs to be some help in terms of navigation, like for seniors to kind of make, when they're making those transitions from one state to another. And I don't know if that's something that you considered, or if it's like even, like even someone to answer the phone, like, okay, I'm used to, taking the bus, but I'd like to still do that if there's a low rise. There's all these questions that come up when you're changing the way that you get around that. So I don't know, it's just, those are the kinds of things I thought of when you.
Yeah, the last panelist was the toughest one for me, unfortunately. I'm kidding. But I think a lot of it comes down to how we support these folks as they transition, and I see that with my parents and my wife's parents, etc. Providing that support to say, you know what, I don't want to drive anymore, but I don't know about the bus. How does that work? And that's going to be a huge challenge for us to try and provide that support, because some people are stubborn. Some people only like information a certain way, and they may not want to communicate. There might be a language barrier. There's lots of issues. So that's something I think we did give some thought to, but it's something that I think that's going to finalize how we approach this and how we really make